A shattered home. Jessica Williams always thought her family was ordinary, but to her, it was the center of her world. Nestled in a tranquil corner of Vermont, the Williams' modest home stood surrounded by a picket fence and flower beds graced with daisies. The scent of fresh earth drifting in with the morning breeze. Life in Willow Creek moved at a gentle pace. Neighbors exchanged greetings from porches, dogs barked at passing mail trucks, and the distant ring of church bells marked the passing hours. Jessica, 17, was fiercely connected to her older sister, Grace, a bright, compassionate woman in her mid-20s who had returned to live at home after college while teaching at the local high school. Grace embodied the kind of calm strength that everyone seemed to lean on. She was the family's confidant, the one who made coffee for their mother on sleepy Sundays, and who always found a way to diffuse arguments at the dinner table with a touch of humor or a well-placed smile. Their mother, Evelyn, was a nurse at the town clinic, respectable, stern at times, but deeply loving. She worked long shifts, but somehow never missed a family dinner, keeping alive a tradition she insisted was the glue that holds us together. Their father, Tom, managed the local hardware store. He was quieter, always fixing something in the garage, but he adored his daughters, and his silent support was as steady as the maple trees that lined their yard. Jessica's life revolved around daily rituals: school, homework at the kitchen table, family dinners, and late-night talks with Grace about dreams, fears, and what the future might hold. Sometimes, on weekends, Grace would take Jessica to the edge of the lake, where they'd skip stones and share secrets, while the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Jessica idolized her sister, who seemed to move through life with both empathy and resolve. Someone who fought quietly, but fiercely, for what was right. The Williams family wasn't wealthy, but warmth filled every corner of their home. The cluttered refrigerator door decorated with report cards and crayon drawings. The laughter during Monopoly games that stretched past bedtime. The way Evelyn hummed old songs while baking apple pie. There were cracks, of course, the occasional stress over bills or tension when work weighed heavy on their parents. But the girls had always weathered these storms together. Jessica often wondered if other families felt this close. Grace encouraged her to believe in herself, to be kind, but also to stand up whenever things felt unfair. Looking back, Jessica would realize these moments of soft encouragement, of gentle protection, were what kept her going once everything changed. But on this particular evening, with the sun streaking gold across the living room, nothing seemed amiss. Jessica watched her sister helping their mother set the table, exchanging inside jokes, Grace's laughter clear and bright. Their father arrived home and kissed his wife on the cheek. Jessica took a moment to let gratitude settle in her chest, for she couldn't imagine life any other way. In this small corner of America, Jessica believed in happy endings. Unbeknownst to her, the peace and unity of the Williams family was close to breaking. Shadows lingered just outside the glow of their living room, unseen and silent. Yet, for now, all Jessica knew was the embracing comfort of her home, a sanctuary of trust, camaraderie, and hope. She had no idea how quickly it would all slip away. A fateful turn. The languid days of summer slipped into the cool,
for race now. The
forgiving embrace of autumn. Golden leaves rustled along Willow Creek's sidewalks. School buses rumbled by in the crisp mornings. Jessica felt, as always, tethered to the routines of family and town. She could never have predicted how quickly the world she cherished would unravel with a single, devastating blow. It started on a Monday, so ordinary, it was almost forgettable. Jessica was halfway through her pre-calc class, thinking of the apple pie her mom promised to bake, when her phone buzzed with frantic messages. At first, they seemed like a mistake. Snatches of rumor, scraps of gossip. Did you hear about Ms. Williams? Principal's office, big trouble. Police at school. A cold knot formed in Jessica's stomach as she realized the words were about Grace, her sister. Within an hour, the news swept through town like wildfire. Grace had been accused of misconduct at the high school. Some claimed she had leaked confidential student information. Others whispered about a mysterious email sent from her account, casting blame for a grade scandal. The principal placed her on administrative leave pending investigation. Local social media lit up with harsh commentary. Parents' chat groups speculated wildly. And even Jessica's friends sent cautious, awkward texts. Jessica's own phone calls to Grace went unanswered. When she finally got home that day, her mother sat at the kitchen table, face pale, holding the letter from the school. Her father hovered in the background, fists clenched, silent and angry, and helpless all at once. The scent of apple pie was replaced by the clinical bite of fear. Grace sat alone in her room, staring blankly at the wall. 1,000 miles away, behind her haunted eyes. The immediate consequences were brutal. Neighbors no longer waved as they passed. Parents pulled their children from Grace's classes. Even friends who once filled their living room with laughter stopped coming by. Rumors thickened with every passing hour that Grace had betrayed students' trust, that she was involved in something criminal, that the police would arrest her at any moment. Tabloid, local news reporters showed up outside the house, cameras waiting, capturing even the smallest hint of distress for their evening broadcast. Inside the Williams home, the tension mounted. Evelyn, usually calm, was now brittle, snapping at small things, her hands trembling each time her phone rang. Tom withdrew to the garage, avoiding his family, unable or unwilling to talk. Grace refused to eat. At dinner, the family sat in suffocating silence, forks clinking with a kind of finality. Jessica felt her world shrinking, every certainty she'd ever held about her family, her town, her sister, crumbling beneath the weight of suspicion. Jessica was certain, with the unwavering loyalty of a younger sister, of Grace's innocence. She tried talking to her parents, pleading with them to trust Grace, to fight back against the rumors, but fear frayed everyone's nerves. Her mother snapped, "We have to be careful. If people think we're covering for her, it'll only get worse." Her father, stoic as always, just shook his head. A few days later, things got worse. The police showed up at their door with a search warrant. Neighbors gathered on their lawns to watch as officers carried away Grace's work laptop and boxes of files. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest as the officers moved through the house. To her, this felt like a nightmare, surreal, humiliating, and deeply unfair. That night, Jessica found Grace sitting by the window, silent tears on her cheeks. "I don't even know who I am anymore," Grace murmured. "I just wanted to help my students. Now everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster." Jessica pressed her hand over her sister's and swore, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, that she would uncover the truth. The fallout wasn't just at home. Rumors spread at Jessica's school. Some classmates treated her like she was contagious. Others relished the drama, the chance to tear down someone who'd once been respected. She heard the whispers in hallways. She saw teachers look away. As the world outside closed in, and even the walls of their home felt cold and uncertain, Jessica's love for Grace hardened into something fierce and determined. Someone out there had turned their life upside down, and Jessica knew with painful clarity that the story spreading through town was not the truth, even as her voice was drowned out by the shouts of a dozen others, and the family she loved began to fracture under the strain. Jessica refused to go silent. In one irreversible moment, the Williams home had been split open. The happy, ordinary life she'd cherished was gone. But somewhere amid the chaos, a quiet, relentless anger was kindling. A fire that would push Jessica to fight back against the cruelty and lies, threatening to destroy the person she loved most. The truth concealed. Jessica woke before the sunrise, exhausted but restless. The tension in their house lingered like a fog. Where their home had once echoed with warmth, and even in troubled times, with hope, now silence pressed in from every direction. Jessica wandered past her parents' closed door, heard her father's restless shifting, and caught the faint sound of her mother, Evelyn, whispering anxiously on the phone. Down the hall, behind another locked door, Grace lay for hours at a time without emerging, her presence haunting the entire family. The official investigation at the high school progressed with alarming speed, but brought little clarity. Every day, Jessica watched reporters camped outside their picket fence. Their cameras gleamed through rain and sun, waiting to catch a glimpse of scandal. Town gossip spun faster than news cycles. Stories morphed in the retelling. Some now insisted Grace had stolen money too, others that she'd threatened students. Jessica knew these rumors were lies, but their weight grew heavier with each passing day, suffocating any sense of normalcy left. Determined to defend her sister against a world seemingly eager to condemn her, Jessica began collecting whatever fragments of information she could. She scoured news articles and social feeds, but it was as if all the facts had been deliberately twisted. The school issued vague statements that all parties involved in the incident would be protected, but leaked emails suggested blame had already been decided. Jessica tried to reach out to Grace's colleagues for support. She was stonewalled or met with awkward sympathy. "I'm sorry, Jessica, I can't get involved," one teacher told her quietly at the grocery store, eyes darting to the shelves as if afraid to be seen. Within the family, suspicion and fear brewed quietly. Evelyn, the eternal caretaker, began to withdraw emotionally. Her hands trembled as she checked her phone for updates from the school board. Their father, Tom, normally steady as bedrock, spent longer hours at work, returning home only to eat in silence before retreating to the garage. Once, Jessica overheard her parents arguing in hushed voices. "We can't afford for this to get worse," her mother pleaded. "If she's guilty, we have to think about our own jobs, too." The words stung like a betrayal. Jessica realized her parents were so terrified of community backlash that even they sounded unsure of Grace. Every night, Jessica attempted to coax Grace out of her shell. Most nights, Grace said little, refusing meals and eye contact. "They've already decided I'm guilty," she whispered one evening, voice hollow. "What's the point of fighting?" Jessica's frustration mounted, not at her sister, but at the cruel power the rumors wielded. shrinking even someone as strong as Grace. When Jessica tried to discuss the situation with her parents, she was met with a wall of anxiety. "Jessica, stop!" Evelyn warned sharply when Jessica mentioned collecting information. "You don't want to be dragged into this. You'll just make things worse." Her father nodded grimly, eyes dark. "It's better if we keep our heads down till it blows over." But Jessica knew that keeping their heads down meant leaving Grace alone in the storm. And that was a betrayal Jessica couldn't stomach. Even beyond the house, the isolation grew. Friends who once texted her every day became distant, answering her messages with single sentences or not replying at all. Teachers who'd praised her academic record now avoided her in the halls. Once, she overheard classmates whisper that the Williams girls are both crazy, and it took all her strength not to lash out. After nearly a week of this grueling limbo, Jessica decided she couldn't stay silent. Each attempt to get the truth about Grace's case was blocked or led her into dead ends. Complaints from the school were shrouded in bureaucracy. Social media posts demonized her sister. Even those who might have believed Grace's innocence were too afraid to speak up. Jessica knew now that someone was actively manipulating the narrative, twisting facts, spinning stories, fueling the family's ruin from behind the scenes. One night, she found Grace sobbing, clutching her phone, her body racked with quiet, hopeless grief. Jessica promised her, "I don't care what anyone else says. I know you. I won't give up until everyone else knows what I know, until they see the truth." It was a promise born out of desperation, but also a new, unbreakable determination. Out there, someone was hiding crucial evidence, feeding lies to the school board and the media. Someone wanted to ensure Grace never had a chance to defend herself. Jessica realized that if she waited for the truth to come out on its own, Grace would be ruined before that day ever arrived. It was up to Jessica to dig deeper, even if it meant risking the few relationships she had left, or standing up to her own family. By the end of the week, tension in the Williams household had reached a breaking point. Arguments over dinner escalated, food left untouched. Her mother begged Jessica, "Please, just let it go." But Jessica's resolve only stiffened. In the darkness of her bedroom, she spread out her notes, ready to map out every rumor, every odd contradiction, every thread of doubt she could find. She'd fight for Grace, even if she had to do it alone. The truth, Jessica realized, wasn't just hidden by chance. It was being buried, and if she didn't act, it might stay buried forever. Refusing to give in, Jessica sat alone at her desk, the last wisps of evening sunlight fading over Willow Creek as she leafed through the notes she'd been secretly compiling. In front of her, pages were cluttered with timelines, names, hastily scribbled theories, and fragments of overheard conversations. The house around her was quiet, an uncomfortable quiet, filled with the weight of things unsaid and the exhaustion of hope slipping away. Since her sister's life had imploded, Jessica had tried to follow her parents' wishes, to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention, and to hope the community's animosity would subside on its own. But each time she saw Grace, once the sunniest part of her life, retreat further into herself, something inside Jessica burned hotter. There was a cold, unwavering clarity in her determination now. She would not abandon her sister to the tidal wave of lies. Someone out there wanted to destroy Grace, and Jessica refused to let them succeed. That evening, her resolve hardened during another stifling family dinner. The air hung thick with tension. Evelyn pushed steaming potatoes around her plate, barely touching her food. Tom stared into space, his jaw set, his mind far away. Grace picked at her chicken breasts, her eyes hollow. No one spoke. Every dinner had become a silent battleground, fragile and close to shattering. Halfway through the meal, Jessica finally broke the silence. "Has anyone called a lawyer yet?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. Her mother's fork clattered against the plate. "Jessica, please, I can't handle this now. We just have to let the process play out," Tom said. "Making noise will only make us look worse." Jessica met their eyes, frustration and hurt pulling at her features. She wanted to scream, to shake them. How could they not see that this wasn't just an unfortunate misunderstanding, but a targeted, vindictive attack? After dinner, she cornered Grace in the hallway. "You have to fight back. We can't let them bury you under all these lies." But Grace only shook her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's over for me. Nobody wants to hear my side. They're only looking for someone to blame, and I'm an easy target." That night, Jessica barely slept. She replayed every conversation in her head. Memories of laughter with Grace by the lake, the way her mother used to hum in the kitchen, the times her father tucked her in when storms rattled the windows. All of it, threatened by someone's greed or malice. As dawn broke, she made her decision. If her family wouldn't act, she would. The first step was to review everything she knew. She organized her notes, mapping out key dates, when Grace had supposedly sent the incriminating email, which students had been involved in the grade scandal, which staff members had spoken up in the swirling aftermath. She cross-referenced rumors from social media with details in the school board's vague statements, seeking inconsistencies. The more she dug, the more things didn't add up. Someone had clearly gone through sophomoric lengths to make it appear as though Grace was complicit. Yet the digital trails felt too neatly packaged. Some key emails were forwarded from outside addresses at peculiar hours. Several students had been asked to volunteer statements and then gone silent. Jessica also noted the chilly new distance from certain family friends, whose child had benefited most from the grade adjustments. Jessica knew she couldn't do this alone. Fearful, but determined, she reached out to Natalie, one of Grace's fellow teachers and a longtime family friend. The two met after dark at a quiet cafe across town. Natalie looked exhausted, but relieved to see Jessica's familiar face. "It's so much worse than you know," Natalie confided, lowering her voice. "The principals made it clear that no one should get involved. I've seen staff emails disappear from the server. There's talk of someone higher up, maybe from the district, pushing for a fast scapegoat. I want to help, but I can't risk my job." Jessica pleaded with her. "Anything small, you know. It could help exonerate my sister. Please, I need something honest, something real." Natalie hesitated, then handed Jessica a flash drive. "I backed up some of the original grade files and some supervisor memos before they lost them. Be careful. People are watching everyone tied to this mess." Buoyed by Natalie's courage, Jessica left the cafe more resolute. She began compiling digital evidence, securing copies on an encrypted drive. She started recording a secret diary on her phone. Observations, overheard snippets, changes in her parents' attitudes, anything that might form a web of truth later on. But her efforts didn't go unnoticed at home. Evelyn discovered the notebook in Jessica's backpack and confronted her late one night. "This isn't safe for you," Evelyn said, voice quivering. "You're just a child. You could ruin your future by meddling. Please, promise me you'll stop." Jessica felt the sting of tears threaten. "But if I don't do something, nobody will. Can't you see? The truth matters, Mom. They're destroying Grace, and you're telling me to just stand by and let it happen." Tom's reaction was colder. "You're putting us all at risk. They could investigate us next. I forbid you from seeing Grace's colleagues or getting yourself involved any deeper." Each warning, instead of dampening Jessica's resolve, fueled her further. In school, classmates' whispers followed her down the halls. Some girls avoided eye contact. Others sent cruel text messages or snickered behind her back. Jessica pushed past all of it, comforted by her purpose and the vulnerability she saw in Grace's eyes whenever she quietly relayed her progress. Then, one afternoon, as Jessica scanned over the flash drive's files at the public library, a boy from her history class quietly slipped into a seat beside her. Michael, shy and bookish, had always kept to himself. Now he glanced at the screen, then at her. "I heard people aren't telling the truth," he said carefully. "My dad works at IT for the district. If you want, I can check if anything's been deleted on the school system. Maybe there's a trail." For the first time since the scandal began, hope flared for Jessica. She agreed, and over the weekend, she and Michael stayed up late in the library's tech lab, sifting through backup logs and security timestamps. The discoveries were chilling. A cluster of files purged the same night Grace was suspended, several from suspicious administrative accounts. Working with Michael gave Jessica needed strength and a sense of partnership she hadn't had for weeks. Though she faced constant warnings at home and ridicule at school, she pressed forward, interviewing reluctant classmates, gathering screenshots before they could be erased, and piecing together a hidden pattern of manipulation. With every new thread, the outline of a conspiracy began to emerge, implicating not just a petty school rivalry, but perhaps power struggles at the district level. Isolated from her family and branded a troublemaker by much of the town, Jessica nonetheless felt a transformation. Her outrage had crystallized into focused defiance. Each betrayal and each closed door only fed her resolve. By the end of the second week, she sat in her moonlit bedroom, surrounded by thick paper trails and untold secrets. No matter how alone she felt, she knew quitting was never an option. She would push forward, step by perilous step, into the shadows of Willow Creek's secrets, refusing to give in until the truth about her sister came blazing into the light. The first clues, Jessica huddled in her room well past midnight, the glow of her desk lamp warping the mess of papers and notepads sprawled before her. Her mind churned with a dozen threads, each leading in a different direction. The point where rumor and reality blurred was dizzying. Until now, so much of her investigation had been built on instinct, piecing together what little she could observe or overhear. Finally, though, tangible clues were beginning to emerge. Fragments of truth, glinting beneath layers of deception. It was Michael's discovery that truly cracked things open. He arrived at the library after school, a manila envelope tucked under his sweatshirt, like it was contraband. "No one saw me take it," he muttered as he slipped into their usual corner. Jessica barely breathed as he extracted printouts, backup logs, email snapshots, file deletion records. "I looked into the timestamp anomalies," he said, voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and excitement. The files connected to Grace's classroom were deleted at 11:53 p.m. But look, her account logged out before 10. And the deletion, it happened from a remote admin access. That's not even something a regular teacher could do. Jessica studied the logs, heart pounding. So someone could have framed her, right? Used admin privileges to erase things? That's what it looks like. And I cross-referenced which accounts had that access. 2 of the names pop up again and again. Mr. Aldrich, the vice principal, and Lisa Roman, the district's IT supervisor. Jessica chewed her lip, recalling overheard snippets from staff meetings and PTA events. Both Aldrich and Roman were powerfully connected, respected, even intimidating. Now, suspicion began to coil in her mind. Did they have a reason to set Grace up? Or were they just covering for someone else? She didn't have to wait long for more evidence to surface. The next morning, as Jessica maneuvered through the crowded hallways at school, she noticed a huddle of students near the science labs. Bits of conversation floated to her ears. Only did it because the principal asked. They just wanted someone to blame. Her heart skipped. She recognized one of the students, Maya, a sophomore who'd always seemed nervous around authority. Jessica waited until Maya ducked into the girls' bathroom, then followed. Locking eyes in the mirror, Jessica tried to smile. "Hey, Maya, can I ask you something?" Maya's face went pale, but she didn't run. Jessica lowered her voice. "The statement you gave about the grade changes. Did someone tell you what to say?" A beat of silence. Then Maya's shoulders slumped. "The principal and Mrs. Roman, they said if I admitted I saw Ms. Williams working after hours on the computers, it would be better for everyone. I never even saw her there. But I was scared." Jessica felt a surge of anger on her sister's behalf. Carefully, she asked, "Did anyone else hear them pressure you?" Maya hesitated, then nodded. Aiden's mom works at the school office. She overheard them talking about making an example, but she said not to get involved, that the school board crushes anybody who goes against them. Maya wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to, but I didn't know what else to do." Jessica gave her a gentle squeeze on the arm. "Thank you for being honest. Don't worry. I'll keep your name out of it." Piece by piece, the illusion of Grace's guilt was starting to unravel. But with every answer, more questions appeared. Why target Grace? Was it because she'd spoken out about faculty mistreatment last spring? Or was she simply a convenient scapegoat? Jessica returned home late that day, her mind racing. Her parents barely noticed her late arrival. The house felt emptier than ever. Her mother numbly watching TV, her father pretending to fix a creaky stair that hadn't needed fixing for years. Grace lingered in her room, but when Jessica knocked and entered, her sister lifted her head. There was a flicker of life in her eyes. "I might have something," Jessica whispered, settling on the bed. She recounted what Michael and Maya had found, and for the first time in days, Grace listened intently. "That makes sense," Grace said, her voice raspy from disuse. "I knew Lisa Roman never liked me. And Aldrich, he always wanted to get rid of teachers who didn't play politics. Last year, when I brought up the missing textbooks at the faculty meeting, he glared at me. Maybe he's getting revenge." Jessica scribbled the names onto her growing conspiracy chart. "This isn't just about you. I think Aldrich and Roman wanted any excuse to flex their power. But I still need evidence. Stuff I can show the media or a lawyer." She spent the next several days in overdrive, fueled by adrenaline and the hard edge of hope. Michael looped in from the library, combing through emails that Natalie had secured. In one, Aldrich wrote to Roman, "Cleanup after spring break needs to be swift. We can't have loose ends this close to evaluations." The phrasing was cryptic, But the implications of secretive action was impossible to ignore. Jessica also reached out to Aiden's mother, approaching her after school. At first, she denied everything, clinging to the party line. But as Jessica calmly relayed what Maya had explained, the woman's defenses crumbled. "Look, I never wanted any of this," she whispered. "But when the board president sets an agenda, you don't argue. I recommend you be careful, Jessica. You're poking a hornet's nest." Tension inside the Williams home mounted as word of Jessica's efforts trickled in. Evelyn received veiled warnings at work. Her supervisor suggested it might be wise to take a leave of absence, so things can settle down. Tom was confronted by a longtime customer at the hardware store who muttered that the Williams girls are troublemakers. Even Jessica received an anonymous email warning her to stay out of things that don't concern her. She refused to back down. With each threat, her determination sharpened. The injustice stoked a fire within her, forging her fear into something resembling courage. Late one Friday night, as she connected leads in her bedroom, Michael texted, "Check the old staff server backups. Might be hidden copies." Minutes later, Jessica was scanning newly decrypted archives. A series of calendar invites showed that Aldrich and Roman held a private meeting the same night Grace's account was used to delete files. The timestamp matched exactly. It wasn't yet enough to exonerate Grace, but it was more than Jessica had dreamed possible just a week before. She collapsed onto her pillow, exhaustion dragging at her bones, but hope fluttering inside her. Jessica knew bigger obstacles waited ahead. Those who orchestrated this could do worse than merely threaten her. But the fabric of the scheme was wearing thin. Soon, she would pull the threads that would unravel it completely. As the sleepy Vermont town slumbered, Jessica was wide awake, piecing together the truth. For the first time since her sister's nightmare began, she let herself imagine a second chance. A day when the Williams name would mean more than whispered scandal, and Grace could step out of the shadows at last, facing danger. Even as Jessica started to piece together the tangled mystery behind Grace's framing, she sensed the invisible lines that separated the safe cocoon of her old life from the bristling hostility of the world outside. Each new clue carried a sharper risk. Willow Creek, once a quiet town of picket fences and gentle gossip, had changed. Now its shadows seemed to watch her, and whispers always trailed a little too close behind. Jessica first noticed the shift one brisk Saturday morning. She awoke to find the air colder than usual, and a heavy silence looming over the Williams house. Her parents barely spoke at breakfast, and Grace didn't come out of her room. Jessica tried to focus on her investigation, but every ping of her phone sent her heart racing. Later, as she crossed the yard for the mailbox, she noticed her bike had been toppled and the basket slashed. A single note, scrawled in jagged ink, lay tucked beneath a rock. "Stop digging, or someone will get hurt." Fear sliced through her, but anger followed swiftly. She would not let some cowardly threat stop her. She hid the note from her family, worried it would only fuel their worry and their desire to shut her out of the investigation. Yet the town's unease was growing, and Jessica felt its pressure more each day. Whispers in the hallways, uncomfortable stares from teachers, and sharp comments on anonymous forums seemed intent on freezing her in place. The danger grew more obvious. Michael, her only real ally, confided that someone at the library had been asking questions about their research sessions. Jessica's emails were slow to load, and sometimes messages disappeared or arrived days late, as if someone was screening them behind the scenes. She heard a rumor from Natalie, the teacher who'd given her the flash drive, that someone in the school's upper administration was furious about outside interference. Natalie herself had started getting late-night calls with no caller ID, and once she came outside to find her car's windshield cracked. Still, Jessica pressed on. She arranged secret meetings with Michael, passing coded notes in class, or exchanging USB sticks on the walk home. Late at night, she pored over schedules and computer logs. The thrill of each discovery dulled only by growing fear. Grace, though withdrawn, began to ask quiet questions through her closed door, and Jessica found herself lying about the risks, desperate to protect her. One afternoon, as she walked home from school, Jessica became aware of a car that seemed to crawl along behind her. It was a rusty blue sedan, unremarkable except for how long it lingered at each stoplight, turning whenever she turned. Her heart hammered. She ducked into a corner store and pressed herself between shelves of canned soup, watching out the window as the car idled, then finally drove off. The sense of being watched haunted her. The next morning, someone had scrawled "Liars" across the Williams' front fence in red spray paint. Her mother quietly wept as she scrubbed it away. Jessica's father, Tom, finally reacted. "You're making us a target," he spat, his voice fraying at the edges. "You think you're helping, but you're making it worse for everyone. Just stop." His anger frightened Jessica, not because it was directed at her, but because there was a helplessness behind it she'd never seen before. A man being driven out of his own home by forces he couldn't fight. But Jessica couldn't stop. The cost of silence, she was convinced, would be even greater. The intimidation escalated. One evening, when Jessica left the library, the door slammed shut behind her, and the lights cut out for a moment. She bolted across the parking lot, barely daring to look back, her lungs burning from fear more than exertion. Home was no longer safe either. The family internet was inexplicably slow. Odd glitches appeared on Jessica's laptop, and she started locking her bedroom door at night, too aware of every creak on the stairs. The final warning came when Michael failed to answer her texts for 2 days. She found him at lunch, pale and anxious. "Someone threatened my dad's job," he confessed in a whisper. "Said I should keep my nose out of things that don't concern me. I want to help you, Jess, but I'm scared. I think they're watching us." Jessica clutched his hand. "They're counting on that fear, Michael. If we quit now, they win. But you have to be careful, okay? Promise me." He nodded, but Jessica read the terror in his eyes. Meanwhile, the pressure on the Williams family continued to mount. Tom lost a major supplier at the hardware store. Evelyn was passed over for shifts at the clinic. Mothers at the supermarket stopped meeting her gaze. Jessica often overheard her parents arguing in hushed, desperate tones behind closed doors. But for every attempt to scare her away, Jessica gathered more evidence. Using what Michael risked to recover, she followed a trail of altered login records and last-minute file deletions, patterns that repeated whenever a staff member challenged the administration in the past. With Natalie's help, she tracked school meeting schedules, finding that Aldrich and Roman had convened with school board officials the very night before the grade scandal story broke. One stormy night, Jessica found Natalie on her doorstep, soaked and trembling. "I can't do this anymore," Natalie whispered, darting fearful glances over her shoulder. "But I want you to have this." She handed Jessica a battered notebook and a thumb drive. "There's a recording, Aldrich talking about making Grace the cleanest fall guy. I couldn't turn it over to the board. Guard it with your life, Jess, and be careful. I think they know you're close." The full scope of the danger surged up before Jessica. The story wasn't just about Grace's innocence. It was about people willing to hurt, threaten, and ruin lives to protect their power. She pressed the notebook to her chest, promising herself she would not let it all be in vain. That night, the Williams home felt no safer than the rain-swept streets outside. Jessica double-checked the locks as thunder rattled the windows and shadows danced across her walls. She reviewed the new evidence and braced herself for what was coming. She had entered a game where the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined, and she knew she was running out of places to hide. But through the storm, Jessica's resolve flared stronger than ever. For Grace, broken but not beaten. For her family, staggered but not yet destroyed. And for herself, a girl transforming from a frightened onlooker into a force their enemies would learn to fear. No longer just searching for answers, Jessica would take the fight straight into the heart of the darkness that had settled over Willow Creek, no matter what the cost. The truth emerges, the evidence Natalie delivered changed everything. Jessica spent half the night scanning the battered notebook, her trembling hands careful as she pressed play on the recording. Aldrich's voice, harsh and impatient, cut through the static. If someone has to take the fall, it needs to be Grace. She's new enough. She doesn't have powerful friends. Roman's reply, cold and measured, sealed the intent. We clean this up before the board review, or it's all of our careers. Jessica could hardly believe it. Proof, at last, that her sister's fall had been orchestrated. The sense of vindication warred with fear. This was dangerous territory, she knew, and possessing this evidence made her a real threat to those behind the scheme. For days, Jessica and Michael worked in secret, backing up files, transcribing the most damning sections of the recording, and cross-referencing timestamps on emails and meeting logs. Each late night in the library's tech lab felt riskier than the last. Jessica's phone buzzed with ominous texts. Blocked. Leave it alone. Once, she arrived to find her locker ransacked, its contents dumped and trampled in the hallway. But these scare tactics couldn't slow her down now. Finally, with the weight of evidence gathering on her desk, Jessica turned to strategy. If she went directly to the school administration or the police, she feared the material would simply vanish, or worse, that she would be framed in some way herself. She needed allies with real leverage. After hours of research, she drafted a carefully worded email to Ms. Klein, a local reporter known for exposing corruption in small-town politics, attaching select files, and offering to meet only in a public place. Waiting for the response was agony. At home, the atmosphere shifted beneath the surface. Tension still tinged every word. But there was something new, a hesitant hope. Evelyn, who had grown brittle and withdrawn, grew curious when she saw Jessica's determined face. "Jess, are you sure what you're doing is safe?" she asked one evening, quietly, while Tom tried to look absorbed in the news. Jessica met her gaze, her voice steely with purpose. "It's the only way. The silence hurts Grace more than the truth ever could." It took 2 days before Ms. Klein replied, agreeing to meet at the Willow Creek Diner. Jessica brought only the essentials, tucking the backup drive deep in her backpack. Michael waited outside, ready to call for help if anything seemed off. Ms. Klein, a woman with quick eyes and a silver bob, listened with intent as Jessica laid out everything. Documented manipulation of evidence, forced student testimonies, the secret meeting between Aldrich and Roman, threats and escalating intimidation. When Jessica pulled out her phone to play the recording, Ms. Klein's eyebrows arched in surprise. She took copious notes and asked pointed, sharp questions, her expression darkening as the facts stacked up. "This is more than a school scandal," Ms. Klein finally said. "It's collusion, intimidation, likely conspiracy to obstruct justice." She promised to bring her connections at the regional paper into the mix and to keep Jessica's name anonymous for her own safety until the story broke. That night, Jessica felt the heavy coil of dread in her chest loosen for the first time since Grace's ordeal began. Finally, someone believed her. When she returned home, the tension inside the house had shifted. Evelyn and Tom, both weary and hopeful, listened as Jessica explained what she'd done. When she showed them the evidence, Tom's shoulders sagged in relief. Evelyn started to cry. The next 48 hours passed in a blur. Ms. Klein called for clarification, fact-checking every detail with dogged determination. Late one night, Jessica caught Grace by her door, the older girl's eyes rimmed red and her voice hoarse. "You really did all this for me?" Jessica nodded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I promised I'd bring them the truth, Grace. I never stopped believing you weren't alone." That weekend, the story went live. A bombshell front page, complete with timelines, redacted transcripts, expert opinions. Local teacher framed in administrative cover-up? The headlines spread fast. By that afternoon, local news vans clustered outside the Williams picket fence, their satellite dishes spinning toward the sky. Other teachers started to call, offering their own stories of intimidation. Parents who'd cut the Williams off began to send apologetic texts. Even the police, stung by public scrutiny, arrived with questions for Aldrich, Roman, and members of the school board. But the backlash wasn't instantaneous redemption. Some in Willow Creek clung to the idea the Williams family deserved their shame, muttering conspiracies about fake news and playing the victim. But a river of support ran in parallel, stronger by the day. Jessica refused to hide. Accompanied by Michael, she gave carefully controlled statements to Ms. Klein and the district investigators, never divulging her sources, but always precise. Though Grace stayed out of the spotlight at first, her confidence started to flicker back. She visited the kitchen more often, greeted Jessica with the ghost of her old smile, and even started making lesson plans in her notebook again, just out of hope. In the weeks that followed, the school board met in closed session after closed session. Rumors swirled. Aldrich placed on administrative leave, and Roman quietly resigning after a brief, defensive email to faculty. A select committee was appointed, outside lawyers began forensic audits, and students who'd been coerced into false statements were offered the chance to recant without punishment. At home, the Williamses' dinners grew warmer. Evelyn cooked favorite meals for the first time in months. Tom hugged his daughters a little tighter, and even the neighbors began to wave again, sometimes shyly, sometimes with awkward apologies. There were moments of setback, vandalized mailboxes, snide graffiti at the football field. But Jessica stopped flinching at every rumor. One gray afternoon, a battered envelope arrived by courier. A letter from the district superintendent, acknowledging the mounting public evidence and inviting Grace to present her side to the review panel. Jessica accompanied her sister, heart pounding, as Grace sat tall and dignified in the wood-paneled room, delivering her truth without bitterness or self-pity. Witnesses were called, timelines shared, the recording played at last for the people who mattered. In that moment, the fog of suspicion began to lift. Jessica saw board members, stern-faced, skeptical before, trade glances of genuine discomfort. After months of dread, the force of the truth itself became undeniable. That night, the Williams house glowed brighter than it had all year. Laughter mingled with quiet tears, and Jessica, exhausted but proud, knew the fight wasn't truly over. Aldrich and Roman's fate remained uncertain, the town's wounds still raw. But she finally believed justice was not just possible, but at hand. For the first time, Grace slept through the night, sunlight brighter on her pillow the next morning. And Jessica, staring into the golden dawn, understood that hope, once almost crushed, had blazed its way back into the heart of Willow Creek, exposing the crime. The air in Willow Creek was electric with speculation as the investigation tore through the quiet fabric of the town. For years, people had been content to glance away from the odd rumor or the subtle changes in school politics. Now, however, the ugly truths, so long whispered behind closed doors, were being pushed relentlessly into the light. Jessica was at the center of the storm. If she once felt invisible in the corridors of Willow Creek High, she no longer did. She was the girl whose sister had been destroyed, then vindicated. The girl whose tireless fight had drawn everything into public scrutiny. Accompanied everywhere by Michael and sometimes Natalie, who had finally found her own courage and begun speaking openly with curious reporters, Jessica walked through crowded hallways with her back straight and her eyes clear, refusing to shrink from the stares or the murmurs that rippled out in her wake. The review board was only the beginning. After Grace's exoneration and the mounting evidence against Aldrich and Roman became undeniable, the superintendent had no choice but to involve law enforcement and external auditors. The district's legal team, so long adept at burying inconvenient problems, was suddenly or forced to cooperate. One gray Monday, the proceedings moved from the school's stuffy auditorium to an official public hearing at the county courthouse. The crowd in the courtroom was standing room only. Students, parents, faculty, and plenty of residents who watched their own reputations hang in the balance. Lines curved around the block outside. Cameras flashed as Jessica and Grace entered arm in arm, both holding their heads high despite the nerves coiling in their stomachs. Across the aisle were Aldrich and Roman, expressionless, flanked by legal counsel. The two had always projected confidence, arrogant, untouchable, but today there was a nervous edge in their eyes, and their posture betrayed exhaustion. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically, each document projected on the screen, each timeline point reinforced by emails, server logs, and Natalie's exquisite documentation in her battered notebook. The secret recording played for the entire courtroom. Aldrich's now infamous declaration, forever severing his plausible deniability. Witness after witness spoke. Students admitting they had been coached. Secretaries recounting instructions to fix things quietly. Teachers finally brave enough to say their contracts had been threatened when they asked difficult questions. Throughout the hearing, the board's internal investigator, hired only after the media firestorm, summarized a damning pattern. Dozens of files had been deleted or altered using Roman's credentials. False statements were introduced to exonerate favored students whose families had political connections. The Cleaning up, Aldrich referenced, turned out to be years of cover-ups, grade tampering, hush money, and intimidation, using teachers like Grace as expendable shields whenever a scandal threatened the administration's image. Jessica's own testimony came late in the week. As she took the stand, she felt the eyes of her entire town burning into her. She spoke with clarity and conviction, explaining not only what she had found, but why she had never backed down, even as the consequences grew terrifyingly real. She ended her account by looking straight at the members of the board. No one should ever lose their future just because it's easier for those in power to cover up the truth. If you let fear win, it never ends. As the days passed, the proceedings grew almost overwhelming in their intensity. Outraged parents demanded accountability. Reporters staked out every public building. Social media teemed with arguments about forgiveness, responsibility, and retribution. For every voice that criticized Jessica and her family, accusing them of shaming the town or feeding on drama, there were now dozens more who expressed admiration or shame at not having spoken up sooner. Willow Creek was finally forced to reckon with itself. Grace, always so composed in the classroom, was unexpectedly fragile on the stand. She was honest about her sense of betrayal. She wept, recalling the students she'd tried so hard to help, and her despair at seeing her name dragged through the mud. But she never spoke with bitterness. Instead, she talked about Jessica's courage and the cost of silence, not just for their family, but for any place that valued peace over justice. Her words cut deeper than any piece of evidence. Like her younger sister, she refused to let fear or vengeance define her. The climax came as forensic investigators presented a chain of evidence, a deliberate manipulation of the grading software that had existed for several years. Each instance matched to periods when Aldrich or Roman faced job reviews or critical audits. The pattern was clear. What had appeared to be isolated incidents were, in fact, an entrenched culture of fraud and intimidation, designed to maintain power and reward those loyal to the system. When the verdict was finally read, there was no real suspense left. Both Aldrich and Roman were found guilty of multiple counts, from falsifying records to abuse of authority and obstruction of justice. The board's complicity was acknowledged, though it was clear many had simply chosen not to see what was right in front of them. Yet, even as justice roared through Willow Creek, the aftermath was complicated. There were those who could not accept the depth of wrongdoing, clinging to denial or blaming whistleblowers for dividing the community. But the sense of relief, of something rotten finally ripped out and exposed to the air, was unmistakable. When Jessica stepped out into the sunlight after the sentencing, she almost couldn't recognize her own town. Strangers nodded respectfully as she walked by. Reporters tried to swarm her, but she politely refused their questions. Today, the story belonged to someone else. Most of all, she felt the angry fist that had tightened around her chest for months at last begin to ease. At home that evening, the Williams family gathered around the dinner table, not just out of habit, but in gratitude. Their mother, Evelyn, prepared everyone's favorite meal and put her arm around both daughters as she set the plates. Tom smiled, his face softer and more open than it had been in many months. Jessica realized, as she looked around, that fighting for the truth had cost them dearly in sleepless nights, lost friends, and shattered innocence. But it had also forged something steely and unbreakable between them, a kind of trust, a fierce love, and the knowledge that they could withstand the worst and still survive together. Later, as dusk fell over Willow Creek, Jessica stepped into the backyard. The air was cool, and for the first time in ages, utterly silent. No reporters, no threats, no secrets. Grace joined her, and they stood together, watching the sky. The world was changed, maybe forever, by what they had exposed. But in that quiet, Jessica felt something she had almost forgotten: peace. She knew the wound in Willow Creek would take time to heal, that some people might never truly accept what had been revealed. But as the stars blinked into view and Grace squeezed Jessica's hand, she believed their family and their town could finally move forward, one honest step at a time. Justice and family values. In the weeks following the verdict, Willow Creek seemed to shift on its foundations. The relentless wave of speculation and rumor finally began to slow, replaced by quieter, deeper conversations about accountability, about trust, and about how easily even the most tight-knit communities could be torn apart by fear and silence. The Williams family, scarred but unbroken, found their lives returning to a strange new normal, one shaped as much by courage as it was by pain. Grace's name was cleared publicly, her honor restored by the truth that Jessica had fought so fiercely to reveal. The superintendent's official statement, read at a school assembly and reported by the local news, apologized for the irreparable harm caused by the investigation's failures of leadership and integrity. The district offered Grace her old job back, along with formal recognition for her dedication to students. But the wounds were fresh, and while Grace was grateful, she accepted only after careful consideration. She wanted to return on her own terms, mindful that her mere presence was a reminder of how fragile reputations could be. Jessica watched her sister with renewed admiration. Grace, once so full of light and certainty, now radiated a more measured strength, one that came from surviving hardship and witnessing the ugliness of injustice up close. She no longer moved through town unnoticed. People approached her in the grocery store, the post office, even at church, sometimes to apologize, sometimes to say thank you. Grace always responded with humility, refusing to harbor resentment even toward those who had once doubted her. Within the Williams home, dinner conversations returned, tentative at first, then more familiar with each passing night. Laughter resurfaced, small worries about weather or homework returned, and the ritual of shared meals once more became the glue Evelyn always insisted on. Tom, who had suffered his own silent anxieties, started taking long walks with Jessica again, sometimes in the morning mist, other times as night settled softly over the fields. They talked about everything and nothing, about honor, about mistakes, and about the pride Tom felt watching his daughters grow, especially Jessica. For Jessica, the aftermath brought its own set of challenges and revelations. She was hailed by many as a hero, as the girl who wouldn't quit, the one who stood up even when her whole world wanted her silent. Teachers left encouraging notes in her locker. Classmates she'd barely spoken to before asked for advice, or just a private word. Still, old wounds didn't heal instantly. A few students avoided her, or whispered, not so softly, about the trouble she'd caused. Some adults, threatened by the light her actions had shown, remained cold. Yet Jessica never let bitterness root in her heart. She had seen, in the collapse and rebirth of her family, the power of steadfast love, how it could anchor people through the fiercest storms. When her mother wept, Jessica sat with her in the dark kitchen, holding her hand. When her father confessed to having doubted Grace, Jessica forgave him quietly. She understood that fear made people small, and that true strength was in forgiveness and moving forward together. The Williamses gradually reconnected with old friends and rebuilt strained relationships. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid them now stopped by with baked pies, stories, or simply apologies. Some visits were emotional, full of awkward silences and misty eyes, but most were sincere. The family was cautious, yet also grateful. They knew now that trust, once broken, took time to heal, and that such healing could not be forced. Beyond the walls of their home, the town itself was visibly transformed. The school board revised policies to ensure greater transparency and fairness. Workshops on ethics and whistleblower protection became regular events. Teachers formed their own committee to advocate for one another and to provide a safe channel for concerns going forward. It was not perfect. Change never was. But something opened in Willow Creek that could not be easily closed again. Grace's return to teaching was a bittersweet affair. Her students, many of whom had once been confused or afraid, now greeted her with admiration and relief. She reclaimed her classroom, filling it with fresh posters and new books, hoping to build not just knowledge, but resilience and a spirit of justice. Grace didn't shy away from discussing what had happened. Instead, she gently encouraged open conversations about ethics, courage, and the necessity of questioning authority when something felt wrong. Jessica found herself channeling her own energies into new passions. Inspired by her experience, she led the charge to start a student-led ethics club, partnering with Michael and even the initially timid Maya. They mentored younger students, hosted discussions, and coordinated volunteer projects across town. The group's mission was clear: to create a culture where the truth could thrive and where loyalty to friends and family was matched by a responsibility to do what was right. Letters arrived from well beyond Willow Creek. University, professors, advocacy groups, even strangers from other states sent notes of encouragement, commending Jessica's bravery and the family's integrity. Some asked her to write about her experience. For Jessica, each letter was a reminder she was not alone. There were countless others who believed in the importance of standing up, even when standing up was terrifying. Within the family, the ordeal had crystallized values that had always been present, but were now openly honored. Honesty, kindness, loyalty, and an unwavering sense of justice. Jessica knew she'd never have become who she was without the support of her family, especially Grace, who, despite everything, had never relinquished hope in her little sister's determination. There were quiet moments, particularly on evenings when the wind had rushed through the trees and the sky burned with sunset, when the two sisters would take long walks by the lake. Sometimes they spoke about what had happened. Other times, silence said more than words could. One evening, as they skipped rocks over the glassy water, Jessica asked Grace, "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" Grace smiled thoughtfully, her eyes brimming with gratitude and pain. "I'd still speak up, and I'd trust my family, even when I was scared. I can't say I'd wish any of this on us, Jess, but I know now that love and truth, together, are stronger than any lie." The season passed. Slowly, the reminders of scandal faded. The Williams picket fence was painted fresh, their mailbox replaced, and the house filled again with the laughter of friends and family on weekends. Their scarred but resilient home stood as a quiet testament to what they had endured and what they had reclaimed. In the end, Jessica learned that justice did not only mean the punishment of the guilty, it meant the chance to begin again, to heal what had been harmed, and to draw ever tighter the bonds that truly mattered. Through trial and heartbreak, her family had not only survived, they had discovered together the true strength of love that refuses to let go, even in the face of darkness. The wrongdoers get their due. The dust from the trials had barely settled over Willow Creek when the sentences for Aldrich and Roman were handed down. For many in the town, the courtroom scenes felt both surreal and cathartic, a reckoning no one had fully expected to see through to the end. Everyone remembered the days when figures like Aldrich and Roman, once so authoritative and unapproachable, had seemed untouchable above the tide of ordinary life. The judge's words echoed in the packed hall. The court finds the defendants guilty of obstruction, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and abuse of authority. Aldrich received a lengthy sentence in a state correctional facility, while Roman, whose history of tampering with student records went even deeper, faced even greater charges and a stricter term. Both were barred from ever working in any public capacity again, their professional reputations obliterated alongside their freedom. But the story of retribution extended beyond the letter of the law. News of the verdict raced through town, through parents' meetings, supermarket lines, crowded church pews, and dimly lit bars. A collective sense of vindication mingled uneasily with lingering shame. For some, it was a chance to finally let go of bitterness, to believe again in the possibility of justice, turning its gaze toward those who had always seemed above it. At Willow Creek High, the changes were almost immediate. Aldrich's once prized parking spot was painted over in school colors. Roman's former office stood empty for weeks before anyone had the courage to move her personal effects. Memo boards and staff meetings now buzzed with new pledges of transparency and restorative practice. An air of watchfulness and renewal took hold among the staff, a promise to remember, day by day, what had nearly been lost. Yet the wrongdoers' reckoning wasn't only legal or professional. Those who had enabled them, who had gossiped, turned their backs, or pressured others into silence, experienced their own kind of fallout. The town was small enough that no one could hide for long from what had happened. A few former friends of Aldrich and Roman sold their houses and left, unwilling to face the sideways glances or the quiet judgment that now followed them. Teachers who had participated under duress or in fear stepped forward in faculty meetings to apologize, not only to the wounded, but to everyone who'd been swept up in the damage. Jessica viewed these developments with a sober eye. She and her family received notes of apology, invitations to town meetings, even requests from neighboring districts for advice on protecting whistleblowers. Still, Jessica remained cautious, aware that true change, especially cultural change, came not with a verdict or a plea, but through each individual's willingness to confront themselves. One of the most significant moments arrived a month after the trial during a town hall meeting. Residents, some still nervous, others determined to finally speak, gathered in the school gym. The superintendent, shaken by the public's outrage, announced the formation of an independent community oversight committee. Grace, now restored to her teaching post, was invited to advise on policies for reporting misconduct and shielding staff and students from retaliation. On this night, local politicians, who had once courted Aldrich and Roman, distanced themselves from their legacy. Willow Creek has learned from its mistakes, the mayor declared, but only because people like Jessica and Grace reminded us what accountability truly means. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew, echoing through the rafters, brimming with relief, gratitude, and perhaps most importantly, humility. Meanwhile, Aldrich and Roman, who had once controlled the rhythm of the school's bureaucracy and the fate of so many, found themselves utterly alone. Even distant relatives spoke of their disappointment rather than sympathy. Letters poured into the prison where Roman was held, some angry, others sorrowful, still others simply demanding answers she could not provide. For Jessica and her family, the aftermath was complicated. The return to ordinary life was neither swift nor entirely sweet. No storybook ending could erase the cost of those long months. Grace had lost friends, endured sleepless nights, and would never quite move through her terror as she once had. Innocent and unguarded, Jessica, too, felt changed, sharper, more grown, sometimes still troubled by memories of threats and whispered doubts. But as the months slipped by, their home glowed warmer again. Family dinners became taken-for-granted joys, where Jessica teased her dad over burnt toast or lingered in late-night talks with Grace about everything and nothing. Their family's patience and faith had been tested, but it was precisely those bonds and their collective perseverance that gave them the strength to face whatever remained. Throughout Willow Creek, the enduring legacy was one of transformation. Classroom conversations grew braver. Students in Jessica's ethics club debated openly, using their school's scandal as a case study. Adults broke old habits of avoidance, gradually daring themselves to look problems in the face. The murals students painted in school corridors now featured images of bridges, open hands, and beams of light breaking through stormy skies. Yet, not every confrontation was public. Privately, Jessica received tearful apologies from classmates who had once gossiped or shunned her. One day, Maya, who had been pressured into lying by Roman, sat beside Jessica by the lake. "I thought I was keeping myself safe, but I only made things worse for you and Grace. I'm sorry. I want to be better." Jessica accepted the apology with genuine understanding, reminding her friend that doing the right thing after a mistake mattered as much as always being brave at the start. As the anniversary of the trial approached, Grace was honored at the school's graduation ceremony, her name spoken with respect and a standing ovation from her students. Jessica watched from the audience, overcome with emotion, as her sister accepted a bouquet of wildflowers and leaned into the microphone. "Justice was never about destroying anyone," Grace said gently. "It's about giving us all a chance to be better, to heal, and to hold each other to account." That summer, the Williams family painted their fence anew, white and gleaming. Life flowed back to familiar rhythms. Jessica spent afternoons reading by the water, her mind turning slowly from the past to her plans for the future. She knew the darkness that had shadowed their family could resurface in other ways and other places, but she also understood last that courage was not a shield from pain. It was the willingness to keep moving forward, side by side with those you love, even after the hardest battles. As the sun set on Willow Creek, Jessica breathed in the clean air and watched the sky soften from gold to indigo. Somewhere, beyond the boundaries of their little town, the world spun on, its dangers real, its beauty stubbornly persistent. Just beyond her reach, she heard Grace laughing with their parents, the sound, a quiet promise, echoing through new beginnings. Justice, Jessica believed, was not a single victory, nor only the downfall of the corrupt. It was a living, breathing effort to repair, to rebuild, to honor forgiveness and truth. And in that effort, she discovered the Williams family had truly found their home again.